Chairman, I just want to comment on two aspects of Part 2 of the Taxation Annual Rates, Employee Allowances and Remedial Matters Bill. One relating to accommodation, that out-of-town accommodation for limited duration projects or for out-of-town secondment that the Minister referred to. And the other part I want to talk about is the confusion that will arise in relation to the tax-free status of some meals paid for by the employer and the conditions surrounding it. If I just turn briefly to the first point I wanted to talk about, which is the issue about out-of-town accommodation that an employer can provide for employees if they are on a project of limited duration or on a secondment. Now, the Minister pointed out, as the bill says, that whereas provision of accommodation in this nature would be taxable as income to the employee, providing it meets the conditions of a limited duration project out of town or a secondment out of town, then it would not be taxable according to this bill. In one case for 2 years for the secondment, or 3 years for the project of short duration, that is out of town. And there's an exemption, or at least the possibility of an extension in exceptional circumstances. The problem with that is that there's nothing in this bill that says that an employee in that situation cannot, for example, take their spouse with them on that secondment or for that period out of town, and they can get their accommodation tax-free, rent their own home that they own in the town of their origin, and effectively enjoy the fruits and the benefits of all of that. So it is not there is a loophole here that is apparent from a reading of the bill. And I'm surprised that the Minister and his vast army of officials has not picked that up when he talks longingly about greater fairness for all. There is an obvious loophole there, so that those whose spouses cannot relocate with them for 2 years or 3 years, depending on the nature of the out-of-town employment, they must continue to maintain a home, and they do not get the benefit of that additional income, as well as the tax-free status for the additional accommodation. So I simply point that point out. The next point I wanted to raise, Mr. Chairman, was in relation to the payments for work-related meals. Now, the conditions for these to be exempt from income tax are that the employment duties of the employee require them to work away from the employer's workplace. And then there are some other aspects of it to describe that if it's food and drink, if it's and it includes food and drink that the employee consumes at a conference or training course. Well, there are many organisations of a region-wide nature or a nationwide nature who organise training conferences in-house on their own premises, and those training conferences are attended by some people who work in that office. I know that because we're having worked for a national union, is that we would run training courses in our premises, might be Auckland, might be Wellington, might be Christchurch. And those training courses, at which we would provide a meal, a lunchtime meal, and if they had to stay overnight, a meal in the evening. But those training courses would be attended by people in Auckland, Wellington or Christchurch respectively, as well as those who are outside of those cities or regions. And under this part of the bill, it would require the union to provide some tax administration to those who were domiciled in the city in which the training course is being held, but to provide a tax-exempt meal to those coming from out of town to the same training course. And I think that will cause confusion, Mr. Chairman, and I think that the IRD are going to have to develop some sort of turning a blind eye policy. I mean, unfortunately, the last person in public office to be willfully blind to an important piece of law was John Banks. And look where that ended up, look where that got him. So many employers will be looking around thinking, gee, well, we don't want to be accused of willful blindness. We too will be found guilty. We may not have our convictions entered at the time, but we will be found guilty of having transgressed our revenue laws, and that will be causing alarm amongst the halls of employers, big and small.
Members, we come to the vote on Part 2. We have the Minister's typescript amendment to Clause 74, an amendment set out in SOP number 455. The question is that the amendments be agreed to. Those of that opinion will say aye. To the contrary, no. The ayes have it. The question now is that Part 2 is amended stand part. Those of that opinion will say aye. To the contrary, no. The ayes have it. Members, we now come to debate on clauses 127 to 191 in Part 3. The question is that Part 3 stand part. Dr David Clark.
Part 3 of the Act includes the changes that relate to the United States